Great. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the November meeting of the Cranston City Plan Commission. We have the consultant with us electronically. So what we're going to do is move up the workshop item first, the comprehensive plan drafting procedure. Let me just open with a kind of a word of explanation. I ended up writing it. So when I sat down and I had the drafts from, first of all, the draft that we had originally, which I had all marked up, and then the drafts that Commissioner Frias and Commissioner Lanphier had put together. And I worked on combining them in the original document. And what I ended up with was a document that looked like someone had done a really bad autopsy on it. So I started from the beginning, and I took a list of the things that the commissioners had asked for at the last meeting, and I wanted to make sure that each of those was addressed in one of the paragraphs. But one thing that we hadn't put in here from the beginning is the overall view of the process and the fact that there are going to be two phases. Now, I know we've spoken about the two phases here, but I'm not sure it was clear to the members of the public or other interested parties that this is going to be a two-phase process. So I added in the first paragraph a description of phase one, which it is basically the inclusion of new and additional material to meet requirements of the current state guide plan. An update of all the facts and figures, census data, and so forth. And the reason we're doing the update first is that we need to have a document that is consistent with the current planning decisions that this commission makes. Now, building on that will be phase two. Phase two is what I think everybody considers the planning process will be. The phase where we hold the public hearings, where not that phase one's not going to be public, it is every step of the way. But phase two will be public outreach, promotional activities, conduct of the statistically valid survey instrument. And this is the part that will help us look forward to the next 10 years of the city. And it is a document that that essentially the city is going to have input into. And that's going to be a fairly lengthy process, but it needs to be done thoroughly and publicly. So now as we go to the pieces that I heard people concerned about the last time, in the first bullet essentially is to ensure the ownership of the City Plan Commission of this project. That it is the responsibility and is under the direction of the City Plan Commission. I didn't make any changes in the second bullet, but the third bullet talks about commissioners having enough time to review drafts, and the number of not less than 2 weeks prior to discussion was mentioned at a previous commission meeting. In the fourth bullet, I've added language that no votes will be taken at the first public reading of any of the items that go into the document because we want the public to have enough opportunity as well. And what emerges from the first reading might be amended. So we want to have a period of time where people can study that and then get back to us with their suggestions. The next bullet, which is the fifth bullet, is that a vote will be taken after analysis and further discussion with amendments, if there are any. We're doing this section by section. So at this point, we're not, well, we're doing it section by section. All right, the next bullet, actually the next two bullets address an issue that had come up, and with each section being individually discussed and voted upon and amendments permitted, and then the entire document, once we have all of these approved amendments, the entire document will be discussed. Amendments even then will be permitted and will be voted on as a whole, and then we turn it over to the city council for its consideration. One other point that's not in the above bullets, but I put it in the second paragraph under information requests to staff and consultant, is the assurance that individual commissioners may have direct access to the consultant. I think that was an important one that we talked about. So it's open for discussion. Mr. Commissioner Lanfear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for considering the edits that I provided. There are a couple of questions I have. During phase one, will each of the elements, for example, agriculture, land use, zoning, will the narrative that it precedes each section be updated in phase one?
I'm going to direct that question to the planning director. My assumption is that there are no sections that can stand as is, as currently written.
What is your question again about whether or not the elements stand?
Whether there's usually a narrative, sort of an overview before each section. Are those going to be amended in phase one?
I'm not entirely sure what you're asking. Like this is a whole new plan. What are we talking about?
Yes, but unless I'm misunderstanding, the chairman said that there's going to be a phase one, which will basically be data updates and informational updates, but you're also going to be updating land use sections with text, with narrative as well.
Absolutely, because the plan has to be consistent with the state guide plan, which has changed vastly since the last time this plan was adopted. So absolutely, there will be narrative sections consistent with the newest state guide plan. Is that what you're asking?
Yes, thank you. And also, Mr. Chairman, two other things. I know that there was a concern by a number of commissioners, which I think you attempted to address, that we be able to speak directly to the consultant. I do see it says that if we wish to make inquiries or ask questions, we can make a request would normally be directed through the planning department, but we have the right to direct inquiries via email to the consultant.
Yes.
As well.
Right. Absolutely.
But not in a phone conversation. In terms of the open process, I think leaving a paper trail or electronic trail
would be best. Discussions over the phone or,
That's fine. I just
Yeah,
wanted to
yeah.
clarify.
Mhm.
Thank you. And my last comment is I do appreciate that you attempted to address all the concerns. One of the concerns that I expressed at the last meeting was for commissioners to be able to be involved before sections are drafted. There was some discussion last meeting about perhaps a subcommittee. When I made my edits, I did say to you in the email cover letter that I sensed that that was not the direction that the commission wished to go in. And so I suggested an alternative, which I thought was a middle ground, and explains that. So I would just offer, and I can send that around to my fellow commissioners, a suggested revision to the comp plan procedure, which would go on the third bullet that you have after the first full sentence. I would add, prior to the drafting of any section or chapter of the comp plan element, the consultant, planning director, and planning staff, as necessary, shall meet with the commission at a public meeting, regular meeting, or special workshop to afford the commission the opportunity to provide guidance, suggestions, and direction regarding the initial drafting of each section or element. This can be done on a rolling basis as the consultant or staff begin the drafting of new elements. And then that was an insert, and the rest of the bullet would continue to read as written. It would, thank you. It would afford all of the commissioners on even footing the opportunity to make suggestions or provide some direction to the consultant about certain issues, especially in land use or other areas of the comp plan. And it doesn't have to be long. I think a short half hour at the end of a meeting would be more than adequate to just have a conversation with the consultant about areas of concern that commissioners may have that would give guidance and hopefully make it more efficient when that draft does come to us. If we don't do that, the first time we have any kind of input as a commission is when we see that first draft. So I do have copies of that, as well as the email that has the reasoning for that edit, and I will provide them to my fellow commissioners. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Lanfear. So in essence, it would be almost a new business in that sense.
Mr. Chairman, Ashley Sweet is on the call now. She has a limited window, so I'd like to have her be able to speak to some of these comments before she has to go to her other commitment.
Okay. Are we ready to take a vote with the amendment? Or would we rather wait until after the consultant?
I would just like to say something quick in support of the amendment. There were three things that I talked about, that Commissioner Zadelis talked about, which was one, making sure commissioners can make an amendment, which I believe this rules allow. Two, that we have direct input to the consultant if we so desire. Again, these rules allow. And three was for the commission to have input early into the process. What Commissioner Lanfear, I believe, is suggesting is consistent with that third one. For example, we originally talked about having a meeting on November 15th. At that meeting, for example, that could be an opportunity for the commissioners to talk about their views and ideas of what should be in the comp plan. I know that when consultant Ms. Sweet was here before, she said, you know, I asked about input from the commissioners and would be happy to hear it. And I said, at that point, I'll tell you what I care about. I care about stabilization of neighborhoods and also maintaining the density in neighborhoods, keeping that in the comp plan. So I'm supportive of this amendment. I think it's a simple thing. It's just basically, we would just say to the consultant and the staff, these are some important things to us. Take this into account as you do your drafting. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. And now Director.
I'd like to have Ashley comment on these comments before she has to go to her other commitment. We didn't have her at the last meeting, so.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Thank you, Jason. I want to just start with saying that I am fully supportive of everyone's desire as commission members to participate. I think it speaks to, the quality of your commission that you're all really dedicated to participating in this process. And we don't always get that. So that's a great thing. What I will say as, kind of words of caution to keep in mind here is that we presented the city with a scope and a budget to get this done, and that we need to stick to that. We also have a schedule that we need to stick to that I will say that we are already behind. We need to draft existing conditions. That's an exercise in taking what you have, finding data, updating new information, making sure that the facts and figures are clearly representing current situations. There's no policy in that at this point. We need to move relatively quickly to get that done so that we can keep on schedule and that we can come back to you and work through the first phase of this, which is to get all of that data updated, get all of those facts and figures to represent current situation. And then there'll be a kind of an exercise of looking at existing goals, policies, and actions and kind of cleaning through those and saying, what have we accomplished here? We can pull those out for now. We can set those aside. We're going to bring them back into the plan, or we're going to push them to, this has been accomplished. What of the goals, policies, and actions are still relevant that have not been accomplished that we need to keep in there? And then are there any that need, some minor tweaking? We don't want to set new policy really in this first phase, because this is an effort in phase one to get the document updated as much as possible, get it to the town council, and get it adopted at a public hearing so that you meet the letter of the law, which says that you need an updated plan. Phase two, we're going to go out to the community. We're going to do the survey. We're going to do public workshops. We're going to have much bigger conversations about policy. That's when we're going to work towards, do we need to set new policy? Do we need to change direction in any of the policies from the previous plan? What makes sense, going forward for the city for this 20-year planning horizon? With the process that you're kind of setting up right now, which is that we have to come and talk at every single chapter before we can draft anything, we're not going to meet that time frame. We need the ability to update the facts and figures, to update the statistics. We're pulling from census data. We're going to ask questions of your police and fire. This is existing information that's out there that's not in your plan yet. We just need to get it into your plan in order to get this first component well on its way. So I just ask you to keep that in mind. We did not scope this plan and this project with me coming to every planning board meeting and having a conversation at every chapter. If the commission wants to do that, I would never stand in the way of that or suggest otherwise. I would suggest that you do that as a commission, and that information gets relayed to us as the consultant. We can take it in written form, and we'll incorporate all of that into the plan. But Mike, I want you to keep in mind that in order to stay on budget and in order to stay on schedule, we really need to follow the scope of work that we set out to the city that was selected and approved to do this project. And I just ask you to also keep in mind that as part of this first phase, we are not deciding on policy. So we really do need the ability to move relatively quickly here so that we can stay on schedule.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Beyond the rules, is there anything else that you would or need to share with the Plan Commission at this time?
I mean, we have been working on existing conditions chapters. That's, you know, we needed to start on those, like I said, in order to keep ourselves on schedule. If there are specific issues or concerns that the commission wants to relay to us as we work on existing conditions, we are more than happy to take that information in whatever form, you know, you want to relay it. I'm sure that we can work with the planning department. You know, if people have specific concerns that they would like to outline for us in writing, that would be extremely helpful. But as I said, you know, we are in the process of drafting existing conditions. So we'll take any input that you have to offer. But we really do need to start doing reviews of existing conditions in order to start to begin to move these chapters forward so that we can stay on schedule.
Okay, thank you. Just one more question I had. In the near term, say between now and January 1st, what areas do you anticipate that the commission will be focused on?
So we create a matrix, you know, for us internally as we work on these chapters that sets up the chapters in sections, you know, provides the deadlines, internal deadlines for us to review so that we can get those out to you as the commission to take a look at. I don't have that in front of me. I apologize. I'm between meetings. I can work with Jason certainly and take a look at that schedule and maybe tweak it and see what Jason thinks would be, you know, an appropriate format or order for you to take a look at some of these chapters. You know, again, we're focusing on data right now. We're not focusing on policy. So there's not a lot of you know, we are just taking the data and reporting the data. There's not a lot of interpretation that's happening, or there's not any policy setting at this point that's happening. We'd really like to get these existing conditions in front of you for your review and comment. And definitely want to hear, you know, from the commission directly, not just on the existing conditions, but really when we begin to move into that policy setting discussion. I think that's when, you know, this becomes a much more important kind of component of it, is that the commission's involvement. Not to say you're not involved in the existing conditions, but as I said, it's a data collection and reporting exercise at this point in time.
Okay, and what I hear you saying, and please correct me if I'm mistaken, that the data gathering is not necessarily a fully linear operation. I mean, you may have research being done in public safety or school-aged children, transportation. So, and at one point, one of those sections will be ready enough to discuss. Is that more or less what I'm hearing?
Yes, that's a good point, is that this is not happening with, we're not picking up one chapter and running it through and then putting that down and picking up another chapter. There's a team of people essentially working on this, and the chapters have been kind of divided out among different individuals who are working on the plan. This is all kind of happening in chunks, sort of parallel to each other. So there's a group of chapters that are currently being worked on in terms of existing conditions at this point. So yes, we are, and I don't have it directly in front of me, so this is just as an example, but if we're working on circulation, public services and facilities, and energy at the same time, we're doing data collection in all three of those different areas simultaneously among a group of planners who are working on this project, in with the purpose to bring you a chapter of existing conditions. And just to give you an idea of typically what a first draft looks like, you're going to see an updated chapter draft that has the most recent information available, with a section with it, a section after that that begins to outline issues and opportunities. We're not getting into goals, we're not getting into policies, and we're not getting into actions, but as the data collection is happening and as we are updating that section of the chapter, we're also taking note of things like I said, issues and opportunities, and starting to bring those to the surface almost in like a bulleted fashion, so that as the commission begins to review existing conditions, you can kind of see what was rising to the surface for us when we're collecting this information and putting it into chapter form. Those will certainly be things that we want your direct feedback on, but that's just kind of the initial beginning of that bigger conversation around, what are the issues and opportunities in Cranston, for instance, facing, public infrastructure or transportation or energy, because eventually those will help guide, along with public input and feedback from the commission members, how those goals, policies, and actions get formulated.
Okay, I know that we only have you till 7, so that leaves us with
I probably have until about 10 past before I need to step away.
oh, okay. In that case, are there any questions from commission members? Commissioner Frias.
This is a very simple one question for the consultant, which is, I understand that we're trying to move very rapidly here. And it could be time consuming for the consultant to have to have a meeting with the commission before each drafting of each chapter. Would it be possible just to have one meeting with the consultant over the next 2 months about phase 1 of the plan before we see a draft? Because it doesn't sound like we're seeing any drafts until maybe end of December, beginning of January. So why is it feasible for the consultant and us to have one meeting to talk about the comprehensive plan and the commissioner's input and views as the drafting goes forward right now? Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
I don't have a problem with that. I'm happy to meet with the commission. If the overall thinking is that, at that meeting, you want to share your issues and concerns across, all the chapters. I mean, that's quite a bit of information to put into one meeting. I'm happy to work with Jason to kind of talk about how we might put something like that together. I think, yeah, I'm sure that we can find a way to, have a middle ground there.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Any other members of the commission? Okay. Are there any members of the public here who has a question for the consultant? Okay, for the record, seeing none, let me ask Mr. Lima if there are any, if there's anyone online who would like to speak.
There is no public comment.
Okay, for the record, no public comment online.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would say after hearing our consultant, and I realized the answer to my question from the director made me think that there was still some policy aspect to what was going to be done in phase one, but I think that it is much less than what was anticipated. So if we were to agree that we can have that one meeting with the consultant, I think that would be fine. I think we're not trying to be unreasonable. We just want an opportunity to be able to do that and do it in a way that's most efficient for everybody. So I would certainly be willing to withdraw my amendment if we could include the provision that there would be one meeting with the consultant prior to receiving any drafts.
Thank you, Commissioner Lanfear. Anything else? We'll be meeting again on this topic. Will we need a special meeting for this?
We didn't, I don't believe we scheduled another meeting in November at this point. We had talked about different gaps, but we did not actually schedule another meeting in November. Come December, we have ordinance work, and we have subdivision regulations, and those things have been taking a lot of staff time and concentration. I think when we're talking about this meeting, again, when we're talking about policy is derived from the public input. The public is going to give us the impetus to say, this is the grounding of the plan, not necessarily staff and not necessarily the commission. It's going to be the public at large after we go through the survey process and we go through the public charrette process. That is what really has to guide policy. So, I'm not entirely sure what's going to come out of the meeting in the next few weeks to say, hey, I want the plan to go in this direction. I don't think that's appropriate at this time. And, to say that, well, we're going to set policy now, this is where the plan has to go. That's not what we're doing in phase one in the first place. So, I just want to caution to say, it's not the time to be setting the policy or the direction of the plan. That's not what we're doing now.
Commissioner Barberi.
This is not for the consultant, but I do appreciate the consultant, I think kind of validated. I think my fellow commissioners know I was a little uncomfortable last week with some of the things that we were talking about, but the consultant definitely kind of validated my thought process. And I would, looking in three different kind of, after we had our meeting, looking in three kind of areas, and one was about time, one was about trust, and one was about transparency. And there's some overlap in all three of these areas where I think the consultant hit the nail on the head as far as being efficient in kind of running up on deadlines. I think if we trust the system that we have in place here, we do have a planning director, we have a planning department, and if we have questions, I don't see the problem in going through the planning director's office, finding the answers to those questions. I think that we jeopardize any kind of transparency with the public if we start doing some of this work out of this scope, and whether it even be in the draft phase or pre-draft phase. I'll be honest with you, I was very confused and I was very uncomfortable with that whole process and not being transparent and doing it in this kind of a forum. And at the same time as saying, how are we going to get through some of the things we get through currently? And I can see the time that we spend in these meetings, if we're going to be working like this on the draft phase and then coming back together. I just think that we're not making more efficient use of our time and efficient use of the people that are in the city that we could utilize first before going to a consultant. And just my personal feel is I truly trust the system that we have in place. And I really don't want to take any more time in doing this when I think we have a system that's pretty well set up. And I appreciate my commission is kind of trying to find some middle ground. I really do. And not to even put down the one meeting that Commissioner Frias even put forward. I just don't think it's needed. I don't see the relevance in talking with a consultant when we have a planning department right here that we could very easily access. I've never been turned away from the planning department in all my months that I've been on the commission regarding any of my questions. And I don't think we could all say that. And if I felt uncomfortable, I think that's something that we could bring right here into a forum and we could have a discussion as commissioners. And again, being transparent with the public. So again, I think I'm a little uncomfortable in doing anything prior to the approvals. And I'm also uncomfortable in talking directly to the consultant without all of us doing that together in one open forum.
Thank you, Commissioner Barbieri. Any other, Commissioner Frias?
If you look at the minutes of the meeting, at the first time we talked about this back in September, we talked about a November 15th meeting. So if it has not been scheduled or wasn't scheduled, I understand, but that was talked about back then. In regards to whether or not we need a meeting, the reliance on the staff, public transparency, having a meeting is very transparent. So if all the commissioners, some commissioners don't want to come, they don't have to come. You can come, you say your piece, you tell the consultant and the staff some expectations. In regards to policy, quote unquote, policy comes from the public. Yes, policy does come from the public, but also comes from state law and it comes from public officials. And so if we want to have any small or needed policy changes, and we're going to have some policy changes just because we now have new elements in the plan since it was adopted since 2010, there is going to be some policy. Let's not kid ourselves. In regards to reliance on the planning department, I have no problem using the information I get from the planning department. Sometimes I agree with their recommendations, sometimes I don't. But in the end, as I said earlier at prior meetings, in the end, I am the planning commission is the one that makes the recommendation to the city council. We are the ones responsible. And I can't say, hey, this was the planning department told me, blah, blah, blah. I have to be the one to stand by it. So if I think a document is not sufficient in a certain area, I need to do my best to make sure it is. And I don't see the harm of having a meeting at the end of November for any commissioner that wants to address the consultant and the staff about certain topics that will be in the comprehensive plan. If people don't want to have a meeting, I've heard from the consultant that she doesn't have a problem with commissioners sending information to her through the planning department that could be shared amongst all the commissioners. That will happen then. That I will do. But it would be more transparent if I did that at a public meeting. So I don't see what the problem is of having a meeting in the last week of November. And any commissioner who wants to show up can do it. And I've already said my piece before in September of two important things that I'm not going to budge on. Maintaining stable and existing neighborhoods, that goal in the comp plan, and not changing the density of established residential neighborhoods. So that's my input at this point.
Thank you, Commissioner. At this time, we have bumped up against the consultant's time. So I just want to thank you for joining us electronically, and we appreciate your thoughts, and we'll continue some discussions here. and look forward to working with you next time.
Thank you.
Okay, we can, well, we do need to pass something here. Where do we stand with the Commissioner Lanfear?
I withdrew my edit and suggested, but at this point I would move to edit the draft plan to include one meeting with the consultant by the end of November, public meeting at which commissioners may attend to provide their thoughts to the consultant regarding initial draft. And let me, I realize that our consultant's not on the line, but I don't think it was ever the intent that we expect the consultant to come and give us a presentation. It's just an opportunity for the commissioners to speak to the consultant in the presence of the public and their fellow commissioners.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. And I don't think that's inconsistent with the type of process that we want to have going forward. Is there a second to Commissioner Lanfear's amendment? Seconded by Commissioner Frias. Any further discussion? This is just on the amendment now. Okay, as many as are in favor of the amendment, please say aye. Opposed, nay.
Nay.
Okay. Commissioner Barbieri votes nay, and the other commissioners vote aye. So that is adopted, and unless there are any other amendments, I will accept a motion on the rules as amended. Okay, Commissioner Zadelis moves and Commissioner Frias seconds. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay.
Nay.
Okay, Commissioner Barbieri votes nay. Motion passes. Okay, thank you, everybody. Okay, next issue, ordinance recommendations. 9/2301, ordinance and amendment of Title 17, Chapter 24 of the City of Cranston, entitled Performance Standards Generally. Mr. Girton.
All right. As was stated, this is an amendment, Title 17, Chapter 24, entitled Performance Standards Generally, adding Section 17.24.50 regarding retail sales of cannabis. Just going to go over a brief summary. I'm not going to read through my entire memo. I know it was a little lengthy, but the summary of my memo is that the ordinance is for the recreational use and sales of cannabis. There was a law which was signed and put into effect on May 25th, 2022, which legalized recreational use and sales of cannabis in the state. Ordinance 9/2301 would establish specific requirements for the potential location of cannabis retailers in Cranston. It would allow cannabis retailers and hybrid cannabis retailers only in industrial zones. It requires setbacks from a list of land uses, establishes restrictions of the land use, and stipulates annual reporting. And this ordinance was written essentially to mirror the content of Ordinance 1-20-03, which regulates the location of medical marijuana dispensaries. So, in going through this, our planning analysis just showed that I'll go section by section here in terms of where we had some comments. Under the definitions, the definition for marijuana retail facility appeared to be a bit redundant. It might be a carryover from 1-20-03. The definition of cannabis retailer in the ordinance refers to section 21-28, 1-3, 16 of Rhode Island General Law, which simultaneously defines cannabis retailer or marijuana retailer to mean an entity licensed pursuant to the general law to purchase and deliver cannabis and cannabis products from cannabis establishments and to deliver, sell, or otherwise transfer cannabis and cannabis products to cannabis establishments to consumers. So to single out and define that separately seemed a little redundant and perhaps was overlooked. I'm not really sure, but it didn't appear to be
Yeah.
particularly necessary.
Greg, can I just stop you on that?
Sure.
So the reason why that's a separate, when myself and when we pulled these definitions, we pulled them right out of the state law. We didn't change them at all. And if you look at medical retail facilities, it says at the end, it says this shall not include cannabis retail or hybrid cannabis retail as defined above. So because medical retail facilities can also mean marijuana retail facilities can also mean hybrid facilities, and some of the hybrid facilities can grow their own marijuana on premises. The cannabis retailer, hybrid cannabis retailer, that it's more of their store only. So that's why the definitions are broken out. That's why the state broke them out, and that's why I broke them out, and they're not duplicative because there are certain marijuana facilities. Again, if you think of the cannabis retail, that's the one on Route 2. That's all they do. They don't process, they don't grow, they don't do anything. So my suggestion is it stays in there. Although I don't see marijuana retail facilities being the wave of the future, because they're gonna have the grow facilities or the retail facilities, but my advice would be just to keep it in there. It's not totally duplicative, and it comes right from state law. We didn't, so that's.
All right, thank you for that clarification. Moving on, under licensing, staff had no comments or concerns regarding that section. With regard to proximity to other land uses, the buffers as written in the ordinance seem to exceed proximity restrictions for like-kind uses as staff sees it, such as liquor stores. The buffers included 1,000-foot buffer from educational institutions, 500 feet from other land uses, and those land uses are listed in the ordinance. They include things like libraries, outdoor recreational facilities, etc. There's quite a few under that. And then 400 feet from residential zoning districts or properties. Retail operations appear to have less, if any, orders than cultivators. It's unclear, odors than cultivators, apologies. It's unclear what nuisances these specific buffers were exactly intended to prevent. The proposed setbacks would reduce the total eligible parcels from roughly 500 to approximately 93 parcels. And staff would recommend that the subject be revisited and further research at a later date if the commission forwards a positive recommendation to ensure the appropriateness of these buffers. Just to show a few maps that illustrate the outcome of the buffers. The first 3 maps I have on here that were also included in my memo, these were generated by previous staff when considering the medical facilities in the previous ordinance that was passed. And so this is just showing the industrial zones throughout the city as is. This is a map with all of the proposed setbacks that were in the medical as well. And this is what the map would look like with the buffers as the gray overlaying the industrial zones throughout the city. I performed a very similar analysis, nearly identical analysis that the previous staff had done at the time, with only a few differences. For example, a gravel pit was included in one of the previous industrial zones, so clearly a retail operation isn't going to be located in the middle of a gravel pit, so I took that off of here entirely. But the result is nearly identical in terms of which parcels would be allowed. So what you see left in purple are the parcels where this would be allowed in the city. And the gray represents buffers from everything that was mentioned, the residential, the schools, and the other list of land uses as well. Just continuing on with the analysis. Staff finds the restrictions outlined in this section to be more than sufficient in regulating potential nuisances. It was a little unclear why this use has been relegated to the industrial zones, given the nature of the use is retail commercial, not unlike liquor stores, which are permitted in commercial zones throughout the city with lesser buffers. Staff, again, would recommend that the subject be revisited and further research at a later date to either allow this use by right in some commercial zones or to establish specific performance standards which would allow for this use by way of special use permits. Additionally, restricting the hours of operation to between 10 a.m. and 7 p.m. appear to be a bit more restrictive than neighboring communities. As an example, this use is permitted to be open as late as 10 p.m. in a few other communities. Some additional context as well when talking about this conversation. When the medical marijuana ordinance was first introduced, there was much uncertainty regarding the subject. It was very new to the commission and the state as a whole. That uncertainty caused concern for potential nuisances and impacts from this land use. Since then, both medical and recreational retailers have become more commonplace, and many of those expected nuisances and impacts did not come to fruition. And although staff have some concerns with the restrictive nature of the ordinance, staff see it as a good and cautious first step to introduce this land use to the city. And again, if approved, staff would strongly recommend that the subject be revisited in the near future to reassess the provisions of this ordinance to ensure that the restrictions imposed therein reflect the seemingly unobtrusive impacts of this land use. With that, Ordinance 9-23-01 appears to be consistent with the comprehensive plan and serves to protect the health and general welfare of the city, and therefore staff recommends the Plan Commission forward a positive recommendation on the ordinance to the Ordinance Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Girton. Any questions, comments from members of the commission? Commissioner Frias.
I'm going to be I want to state this up front is that I am inclined to support the conclusion of the recommendation, which is a positive recommendation to the city council. However, I'll be making some amendments to the language in the actual recommendation that we are sending to the city council, because the recommendation of the staff becomes our recommendation if we approve it. So at a later time, after we hear public comment, other people, I'm going to make some amendments and I'll explain it to my fellow colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other comments at this time from members of the commission? If not, is there any member of the public who would like to be heard on this matter?
I wasn't planning on speaking, Mr. Chairman, but as I listened to Greg talk, I want to say that I support the mayor's intentions in this ordinance that it be restricted to industrial zones. And I think that it's a mistake for us to approach this in a very liberal, progressive way. I think we need to be concerned about this. We've got to be concerned about where they're located. I think industrial zones with the restrictions proposed by the mayor are appropriate, and the commission should not be receptive to that. And if that eventually comes to the city council, I'll speak against it at that time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Murray. Any other members of the public who should be heard? Mr. Lima, do we have anyone online?
There is no public comment.
Okay, for the record, no public comment. In that case, Commissioner Frias.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, colleagues. It's kind of, I was not planning to be at this meeting on Tuesday because my kid, my oldest child is going to be, plays for Cranston West Soccer. And they had a game, but because of a technical difficulty, I'm here today. And so instead of writing a letter to all of you, I'm actually going to talk about this. So as I said before, I support the overall recommendation in the sense the conclusion. However, what gets submitted to the council will also include the report. And the report itself has some language in there that I do not support. And I don't support it. And I understand there's differences of opinion, but because I want to be clear that we, the commission, don't adopt this language. So that's why you would delete it from this report that we sent to the commission. So I'll go through it slowly and I'll explain each amendment. So at the bottom of page 1, there begins the sentence, "There is a clear growing demand for retail sale of cannabis in Rhode Island, and staff finds that access to the sale of this product is correlated with the health and well-being of the city." That sentence, I'm going to be making an amendment to delete because our staff is not medical professionals. I have never seen any studies showing that recreational marijuana, the growth or demand of recreational marijuana, has positive health benefits. And I, in good conscience, am not going to have that in our report that we send to the commission. I understand people have differences of opinions, and I respect the staff making a recommendation to us that expresses theirs, but I don't share that. And I don't want my name associated with a statement of health like that. Legalization occurs for activities that have addictive qualities to it or substances that are addictive because one, a large enough segment of society accepts it or tolerates it. 2, it's just impossible or costly to prohibit it. And 3, the state or the government realizes they're going to generate some tax revenue if they legalize it. That's what's happened in the past, whether it was gambling, alcohol, what have you. So this I don't see as a health issue. So then on the second page, you go to the paragraph that starts the ordinance as proposed. In the middle of the paragraph, it starts with this sentence. "It is unclear to staff if these buffered zones are warranted as potential nuisances generated by this land are not clear, especially given the buffers offered by the sale of alcohol." And then it goes on for the rest of the paragraph talking about these locations. The reason that buffers exist of that length in general for alcohol is to keep it away from places where children congregate. If you look at all this, schools, libraries, residential neighborhoods, youth centers, that's what the purpose is. It's not just about noise or traffic. And there are studies that show that proximity of alcohol to where children are increases consumption of alcohol. I'll read you, for the record, a quote from an academic study about this. Just give me 1 second. Quote, "3 systematic reviews, including 135 studies, have found positive associations between neighborhood alcohol availability and alcohol consumption. Research focusing exclusively on children has shown that residential neighborhood alcohol availability is associated with increased alcohol consumption. There is also emerging evidence that alcohol availability in the school neighborhood is associated with alcohol-related outcomes. Interestingly, the strongest association between alcohol availability and childhood drinking are found in younger children, ages 12 to 14. That is the philosophy behind these buffers. I don't see a problem with them. And I'm going to keep talking, and then you can retort. There is a difference right now in state law that alcohol is like 200 feet away, and some of these buffers are 400 and 500. Alcohol has been with us in legal form, one way or another, off and on, for thousands of years. We are aware of it. We know the impact. We understand the situation. Recreational marijuana is a new thing. It's legalization, that is. Before we start treating it just like alcohol, we should have enough information to understand what its impact is. So if I had to decide, I would rather err on the side of having a bigger buffer than a lesser buffer. So on that section is why I like to remove that. Which then brings me to page 3. This is the second paragraph. Starting with, for these reasons, the staff believes that the proposed setbacks are more than sufficient to remedy potential impacts. And then it goes on that it'd be revisited and researched at a later date. I would ask to delete that because if the city council or the mayor want to revisit it, they can let us know. They will do so because they get more information or because of just differences in people's acceptance of this. Last 2 edits, page 8. The first paragraph talking about these restrictions more than sufficient. I would delete this paragraph. My goal here is we will have it legal, but we want to have a buffer. I'm not interested very much in the economic development aspect of recreational marijuana. The amount of revenue we're talking about here is probably like $250,000 for the city of Cranston if we get like 10% of the demand. I'm not interested, $250,000, you can't even pay for the city's office supplies with that. And to do that, we're gonna go out and do these things to make it accessible and exposing our children potentially to this. Then the last paragraph I'd also delete. And then I want to focus on this particular sentence. There is relatively fixed number of cannabis consumers, much like alcohol or any other retail products. Historically, you will see that more as a activity becomes more culturally or socially accepted, more people will use it. That occurred in gambling, for example. And it also went the reverse direction in regards to tobacco smoking. It's not fixed. And second, even if the number of consumers are fixed, the usage per consumer varies over time. In 1910, before Prohibition and the dry laws, Americans used to consume about 2.6 gallons per year of pure alcohol. After Prohibition, 1940, it had been declined to 1.6. And then it became more socially accepted again. In 1970, it was up to 2.6. So it varies. So for these reasons, I've elaborated. I would like to delete these sections from the report. The report would go as revised. And this would be the only report that would be sent to the city council. Because this is under the charter, it's we who make the recommendation. And the reason I do this, again, I don't want to make it harder for parents to raise their kids in a drug-free environment. That's basically the bottom line for me. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner.
I would just like to clarify something if I might. Nowhere in my memo did I state that no buffers should exist. When I say that it's unclear to me why, it's about the exact proximity of these buffers, which far exceeds something like alcohol, which we know has detrimental effects to the point of if someone consumes enough of it, they die. I know that firsthand from family members who have died from liver cirrhosis. Whereas it's well studied and documented that cannabis consumption will not kill someone. So there's a clear and distinct difference between the two products and what's being proposed here for something that's of a lesser health concern has far more reaching. So that's just why I made that comment. And again, I said that it was just unclear why the exact proximity and especially the extended list of land uses. Again, even the number of land uses that this retail cannabis would be precluded from being near, far exceeds the sale of alcohol in any shape or form. So I just wanted to clarify my intention with that point. So it's not to say that there shouldn't be any buffers. I would disagree with that as well. There should be some buffers. You don't want something like this being sold right next to a school. I would completely agree with that. But I just wanted to make sure that what I wrote was categorized correctly, because I felt like your interpretation was a little different than my intention in writing that. That's the only comment I will say for now.
And I just want to say thank you, Greg, for correcting me if I said no buffer. And I didn't, if I said I misspoke. My view on this, even if you don't die from marijuana like you would die from alcohol, you can become addicted to it. And I'm concerned about addictive substances. So that's kind of my view on it.
And just from a pure legal standpoint, not taking any side, is the reason why the ordinance was written with the buffer footage, 500 feet, 400 feet, was what was consistent with the prior ordinance regarding retail grow facilities and the medical marijuana facility. So when I drafted this, I just wanted to keep it consistent for both planning purposes and enforcement purposes. And frankly, for there's only going to be a limited number of these licenses issued per this 4 zones in the state of Rhode Island. It's only going to be a limited number of licenses issued. So probably it's going to be one facility in the city of Cranston. This gives that applicant clear guidance on where they can go. They're not looking at, well, it's if it's a hybrid facility, it's 300 feet, and if it's a pure cannabis retail, it's 500 feet. So I just wanted to keep it consistent with the other ordinances, both for the public, for any applicant, and for the planning department.
On the note of that as well, just in reference to why there's some language around revisiting the subject matter, that is exactly why I recommended revisiting this at a future date. When that ordinance was written, recreational cannabis consumption was not legal yet, and those stores had not opened in our neighboring states and not in our own. And so we're in a position now where we're able to see what the land use impacts or otherwise would be from the retail sales of this throughout the state and neighboring states. And by allowing this in the industrial zones as the ordinance has provided for, with the buffers, we will be able to see those if any at all, nuisances or impacts. And if at that point, it would be reasonable to revisit the subject matter, given that this was written based off of a prior ordinance prior to the legalization of the product. So that's why I wrote that it should be revisited, because it's worth researching.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Garten. Commissioner Lanfear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was actually on the commission when we enacted the medical marijuana standards, and there was a lot of concern by the commissioners at that time to restrict it sufficiently so that when recreational marijuana came to us, which we knew would be coming, we didn't have a more broad set of standards. So that was part of the reason. I agree and I agree with the staff's recommendation, but I too have difficulty with the analysis and some of the, I think, suggestions for changes down the road. What we're being asked to do on an ordinance is to recommend to the city council whether or not that ordinance is consistent with the comp plan. We don't have to get into whether or not the ordinance serves to protect the health and general welfare of the city. So I agree with Commissioner Frias. I would also suggest that he add to his list of deletions in the recommendation, the language that says and serves to protect the health and general welfare of the city. Because number one, it's not required that we put that language in there, and I can't agree that it does protect the health and general welfare of the city.
Just to clarify as to why it was on my recommendation, that because the ordinance is restricting it from being in all of those other places. In theory, that is what is protecting the health and general welfare of the city per the ordinance. Not that consuming or having access to cannabis, per this recommendation specifically is what I'm referring to. Not that having access to the product protects the health and general welfare, but the ordinance itself protects the health and general welfare. Again, specifically regarding the recommendation. I take the nuance on the original point in the initial paragraph of the analysis, and I don't necessarily disagree with that.
Thank you, Mr. Girton. I did misread that, and I appreciate you pointing that out to me. So as you explain it, it makes sense. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I'm gonna throw it out there. So as I said in my comments, I'd like to have certain things deleted from the report that we send to the city council. So I'd like to make a motion to amend the report to delete those sections and sentences that I elaborated in my comments that we're sending to the city council. We would maintain the recommendation exactly as written, but just the underlying report that is forwarded to the council, those lines would be deleted, because once we adopt the recommendation with the report, I want to be clear that you can say on the top of the report, by the way, as revised by the commission, okay? But I just want to be clear that the commission's position, sometimes the council will say this is the commission's position. And I want to be clear that the commission's position would not have that language that I just elaborated step by step in my comments. I'll make that motion.
Commissioner Sedelis, did you want to speak?
And Mr. Chairman, I was trying to get a question answered on this side of the rostrum. The actual report or the recommendation from the planning department is attached to the ordinance when it goes to council, the physical staff report, or is it just the ordinance that gets recommended to council?
No, I'm sorry, Tom, so the ordinance has been drafted, it's been referred back here. So the council has the ordinance, and then when it gets sent back to the council, it has I'll call it the narrative recommendation. Usually it's staff, but in this case, it's going to be staff as amended by the planning commission, however.
So this document before us now does get advanced to.
Correct, and that's to allow the city council to not only take in the flavor, but realize if they're not, obviously there's no one online, but to read the analysis of the planning commission, both regarding the comprehensive plan and your all thoughts regarding the ordinance. And that happens, it's the narrative that happens anytime. They just don't send it back positive. It's positive plus the recommendation, the written recommendation.
Okay, and that provides a different light to this conversation, because I thought we just advanced it, and I can't say I agree, or I wouldn't have worded it that way, but now that I know that this is going to be an addendum to going forward, I'm somewhat inclined to agree to some of the amendments.
Okay, Commissioner Frias, do you have in writing a list of these? I I was highlighting them as you spoke, but I'm not sure I have all of them. I
Yeah.
do want the,
Well, I mean, two things. One is,
Yep.
and I'll ask this to Greg or Jason is in other, and I hate to say this, in other communities that I represent, since we're on YouTube now and it's pretty easy to go back and have exactly what Steve said, put in the motion, put in the final recommendation. But I'll leave that up to you guys.
I can make the amendment and my motion again, an amendment, and I'll be very specific as I go section by section. I would amend and delete as follows. On page 1, last paragraph, last sentence, which begins with the word, there is a clear growing demand for the retail sale of cannabis. I would delete that sentence. Page 2. 5th paragraph. In the paragraph that begins, the ordinance as proposed restricts cannabis retailers. In the middle of that paragraph, it starts with the sentence, it is unclear to staff if these buffered zones are warranted as potential nuisances generated by this land use are not clear. That entire sentence to the end of that paragraph, I would delete. Page 3, second full paragraph, middle of the paragraph, beginning with the words, for these reasons, staff believes that the proposed setbacks are more than sufficient. To the end of that paragraph, which is basically 2 sentences, I would delete. Page 8, first full paragraph, staff finds, I would delete. Additional context, last paragraph that has additional context and the paragraph starts at the time that the original medical marijuana ordinance first was introduced, I would delete that entire paragraph. So that is my amendment and my motion. And I think I've made it as clear as I can from a legislative, from a perspective, from anyone's perspective. They could follow along pretty clear what I did.
okay, the motion's been made. Any further discussion? I'll accept a motion. Motion made by Commissioner Frias, seconded by Commissioner Barberi. All in favor of the amendments? Please say aye. Opposed, nay. Okay, passes unanimously. So now we take a vote on the recommendation itself, which as you've seen is a positive recommendation. And obviously it comes with the narrative that has just been amended.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to approve the staff recommendation as amended.
Motion made by Commissioner Tsedelis.
I'll
And
second.
seconded by Commissioner Matus. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and that passes unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you, my fellow commissioners.
Okay, ordinance, second ordinance, 92305, an amendment of Title 17 zoning entitled Industrial Uses.
All right. Good evening, everyone. For the record, Kenneth Kirkland. I'm going to go through the second zoning amendment, ordinance 9-23-05. This is amendment to section 17.36.010 regarding industrial uses, regarding performance standards. So, chapter 36 appears to be a long pre-existing ordinance that dealt with performance standards for industrial uses. They have certain standards in terms of controlling certain nuisances like noise, vibration, dust, fumes, etc. So currently, the ordinance only has these additional performance standards for industrial uses. This amendment proposes including commercial uses and the commercial zones, so commercial zones and then structures and uses into that requirement as well. So that's why it's called commercial. I called it commercial uses in the memo, so it'd be commercial and industrial uses. So it's important to note that there are no changes to the actual performance standards. There's no changes to the measurements. So there are no changes to the actual performance standards themselves. There's no changes to the measurements, calculation, etc. It just adds the additional commercial uses C1 through C5, and then all commercial uses that may happen to be in residential zones. So part of this, kind of just part of a background, as I said, I believe this predates the concept of development plan review, which is codified at the state and here. So as many of us may know, development plan review currently takes in all non-residential development and reviews it for, for nuisances, noises, making sure that it's developed properly, and any sort of issues are being mitigated appropriately. So this is part of the development review process, and part of this industrial uses chapter, as we'll call it. This is actually part of the building permit review process. So following development plan review, there is an opportunity to then have this utilize this chapter. If the building official may utilize this chapter if they feel they can't make findings on these certain types of nuisances. And really it kind of comes up to unforeseen or unique situations or uses that may come up in between the development plan review aspect and the actual building permit and construction process. So really this is more of an additional tool in the development review toolkit altogether. And again, there are no changes to the performance standards themselves or the measurements by which they're metered. They're just adding in commercial zones, uses, and districts. So looking at chapter 17.120.030 of the zoning ordinance, you look at both comp plan analysis and the overall look of the general purposes of zoning. So typically, I've come back and so this statement here is going to include several comp plan goals. So I say the comprehensive plan speaks to mitigating non-residential impacts on adjacent properties through regulation and design, expanding tax base by constructing properly designed and sited commercial and industrial structures in areas that are suitable for those structures, or actively redeveloping existing sites that are underutilized, which overall enhance the existing development process. Existing development process. So that includes land use policy 2.6, economic development policy 5.1, economic development goal 3, economic development policy 3.1, economic development policy 4.1, economic development goal 4, and economic development goal 9 and policy 9.1. So that's pretty much the aspect of the comp plan which talks with that, and then looking at the fact that when you have non-residential uses, they get reviewed. They have to be in compliance with the zoning ordinance unless there's a variance or special use permit. Development plan review, this aspect here, these are all reviewed ahead of time. So the fact that all of those, you have to be consistent with the zoning ordinance by the fact that you're reviewing it, it's consistent by that very nature. So again, staff recommends the Plan Commission forward a positive recommendation on this amendment to the City Council.
Thank you, Mr. Kirkland. Any questions from members of the commission? Does any member of the public like to be heard on this matter? Okay, for the record, no one. Oh, yes, Mr. Murray.
I did come here tonight to speak to this. I wasn't prepared on the other item. For the record, Robert Murray. I understand the genesis of this ordinance. I've been at city council meetings, safety services committee meetings. I call this the Edgewood Laundry ordinance issue with vibration down there. And and it's a legitimate issue for the city council, and the Safety Services Committee to discuss and review. And yeah, for the record, I don't represent anybody in that process. But as I read this ordinance, the word of unintended consequences comes to mind. And I know the council president's here, and I will better articulate specifics to the ordinance committee next week. But my general comment is just that there's a lot of inconsistencies in the ordinance where, and I don't know who drafted this, and I'm not being critical. It's just that there was an attempt to apply commercial uses where the ordinance talked about industrial uses. I get that. But then there's a series of paragraphs in parts of the ordinance that only speak to the industrial. So you don't get the process that's required for industrial uses for commercial uses. So when you're directing the building official to certify something, but you say that commercial uses apply, but you only tell them to certify industrial uses, I don't think that's what is intended. I have a larger concern with the intent of this because as someone who deals with this quite a bit for businesses, we have taken what right now our industrial standards were in the C5, M1, and M2 zones, C5 being the most heavily commercial. We've added the uses that are now within the C1 to C4. So we go from everywhere from neighborhood business to general business or whatever. I think C5 is the highway business. And I have to read these ordinances literally when I'm advising clients, for example. So I could read this that says if Batola on Ralph Street moves out and the landlord wants to put a comic book store in there, when it talks about a change in use, it may require the building official to certify that new comic book store is in accordance. I know that's not what is intended. I'm just, and I'm not being critical. It's just that I'd ask that, and I'll share with the council that we just make sure the ordinance ends up doing what it intended. If we're trying to address the Edgewood Laundry situation, I'm not specific about Edgewood Laundry. I think there's an opportunity where we can. There should just be consistency, and that's the major thrust of my comments. It may just require someone to take an eyeball look at it and saying we need to add commercial here. It's added some places, but not everywhere. And I'm not being critical of the ordinance, but as I said, if we're going to make these standards, which really are industrial standards, apply to commercial uses, but we don't give them the mechanisms to request a hearing and things like that, I don't think that's what's intended. So that's, and I'm not asking the commission. You know, I know the staff is recommending approval. I'm not trying to argue against that, but I didn't want to let the opportunity go by, at least to say to the commission that what I'm going to say to the audience.
And
thank you.
But just one thing. So obviously the ordinance is just here for a recommendation on the comp plan, and maybe not directed to Bob, I'm sorry. But we're here is just directed for recommendation on the comp plan, and not, obviously, this board doesn't have the ability to amend anything, even if the board thought it was, you could certainly send a recommendation regarding any amendments, but you have no ability to amend the ordinance that's here. Just wanted to.
I wasn't suggesting.
Yeah, okay.
But I thought I should at least share the concern. That's.
Thank you, Mr. Murray. Any other member of the public wish to be heard on this matter? Mr. Lima, do we have anybody online who would like to be heard on this matter?
There is no public comment.
Okay, for the record, there is no public comment. And I'll entertain a motion that public comment be closed, including present and online.
I'll make a motion to close public comment.
Motion made by Commissioner Matus to close public comment. Seconded by Commissioner Barbieri. All in favor, please say aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Comment is closed. Other questions from members of the commission? Okay. Okay, so we have a recommendation from staff, positive recommendation. Obviously, notwithstanding any amendments that the ordinance committee may wish to apply to this. This is that it is consistent with the comprehensive plan. So I'll accept a motion. Motion made by Commissioner Barbieri. Seconded by Commissioner Zadelis. All in favor, please say aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the motion passes unanimously. Okay, next order of business, we have two items for recommendation to the board, zoning board of review. First one is the Bridge Group LLC has filed an application for permission to convert an existing industrial building to residential use with 2 dwelling units at 5 Aborn Street.
So this is a use and dimensional variance request for, at the same property. It's located at 5 Aborn Street, Assessors Plat 1-1 Lot 30. This is down over in the Patuxent Village. It's zoned C3 general business with a future land use designation as neighborhood commercial services. So the summary is the use aspect is to allow the creation of a 2-family dwelling where residential uses are prohibited in C3. And the dimensional request is to allow the creation of a 2-family unit on an undersized property on 5,278 where 8,000 is required. So I'm going to have this couple photos on here. There's an aerial view. This is an existing street view. This is an existing conditions survey. And then this is an overview of the proposal layout. Ground floor, first floor, second floor. We have existing and proposed elevations. And there's a rendering of this proposal. So there's some pretty detailed analysis from both my predecessor and myself that kind of went into this. I do know that this came in front of the commission about a year ago, and roughly the same findings were made, so I don't want to go too much into it. But essentially what it's saying is that there are certain aspects, there are certain neighborhoods where that they predate zoning, and sometimes the requested relief is actually more in tune with what's there rather than what is listed as part of the future land use map and the zoning itself. So I'm just going to point out a few things on here. So there are approximately about 33 other residential uses currently in the C3 zone adjacent to this area. There's 2 4-family structures as direct abutters, and only 18 of the 50 parcels within the 400-foot buffer are zoned commercial and are not used for residential purposes. This is just to get a perspective of the general area. So looking at the density, it's about 16.51 units per acre, and we do the density of roughly the surrounding neighborhood, it's about 33 units per acre. Clearly, both of them predating zoning by quite some time. A lot of the 2-family uses in this 400-foot radius are all pre-existing non-conforming, and numerous variances were granted in the last 10 years. So the comp plan really talks about, particularly housing policy 5.1, talks about supporting preservation and improvement of existing non-conforming two and three family dwelling units to kind of reduce the zoning burdens placed on those properties, and really the support of existing, the support and improvement of existing neighborhoods is really kind of a protection of housing aspect of it as well. And we're really making sure that zoning matches the existing built environment, housing policy 5.2. So really one of the big chunks in the analysis is listing that if it were zoned and designated on the future land use map as residential, it would be above the highest density permitted or planned for the city, but as a two-family structure, it'd be less dense than the surrounding neighborhood areas. And again, these are areas that vastly predate zoning by about 200 years, give or take, on certain properties. So given the existing what this property looks like now, currently it's like a cinder block, cinder block and vinyl mixed together. There was in fact a use variance for a two-family back in 2002, according to the records. On the application, it's listed as storage as its current use, but it appears that there's an ongoing residential aspect to it. But just going by what was on the application, I do know the attorney of record is here. I'm sure there'll just be a little presentation as always at the end. But really looking at the existing conditions and going into the renderings, you're going to have much more of a consistent facade in this area, which matches the actual character of the overall neighborhood, and kind of cleans up this area and makes it more appropriate for the surrounding area. Again, this is what we talked about already. So looking at this, we would say that it is in fact consistent with the goals and purposes of the comprehensive plan and compatible with the general character of the surrounding neighborhood. And we recommend, staff recommends a plan commission adopt the findings of fact and forward a positive recommendation to the zoning board. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kirkland. Is the applicant here?
Just very quickly, it's probably my fourth application on this property over the last 15 years. I know this is a use variance for people. Some people in commission are very familiar with this area. It's in Patuxent Village. It's down the street going towards the Patuxent Athletic Club on Aborn Street. This particular area, we extend the finger of the commercial zone down Aborn Street. So, the commercial zoning aspects of Broad Street, I totally get, but when we head towards the water, it doesn't transition to residential. And even though behind this building, there is numerous residential structures and it's surrounded by residential structures because it's far enough down Aborn Street. We have had approved back in, I think it was 2002, before my time, before my involvement, two dwelling units. At one point, I had 3 dwelling units approved, and a neighbor who was concerned about his view of the cove opposed it, took an appeal to Superior Court. We didn't pursue the appeal because of the use variance aspect of it. We then came back, we lowered the building with 3 units, the roof line. Same neighbor showed up. The zoning board denied that application. So nothing was pursued beyond it. We're now beyond the limitation on successive petition period. So we're now back trying to get 2 units approved with a lower roof line. There's a 35-foot height limitation in this zone, and we're not exceeding it. We're not asking for any. The C3 zone is the most liberal in terms of setbacks of all our zones, but I don't think anybody in the area is troubled by the residential content of the intended use. we are having difficulty with the building official in terms of if we try to do it for commercial, because it's in the flood zone, we can't put anything on the first floor. If it's residential, we can use it for the garage. So we're between flood zone problems and a neighbor who's worried about his view. The neighbor did come last night to the zoning board, met last night. This matter was continued, and I've known the neighbor for 35 years. I told him the meeting got continued to January. He says, no, I told him it was December, but the bottom line is, I don't know, I'm hoping the zoning board will be receptive to it. We're trying to work this through, but that is, and I think the commission in the past has been supportive of the residential use here. I think it's more appropriate for the area personally, but I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions from the commissioners for the applicant? Okay, seeing none, does any member of the public wish to be heard on this matter? Okay, seeing none, Mr. Lima, is there anybody online who wishes to be heard on this matter?
There is no public comment.
Okay, being no public comment present or online, I will just add that for the record. Other questions? Commissioner Frias.
Just a comment, before we vote on this. I'm going to be voting I will not be voting in favor of a positive recommendation. And the reason is this, it's a use variance. People who know me on the commission, I do not vote for use variances because of the high standard, unless there is very unique circumstances. 2 years ago, we dealt with this approximately, or 2022. I remember at the time agreeing with staff and giving a positive recommendation, and then speaking to the city solicitor later on, explaining to me the hardship, the high standard for a use variance. And that's why I will not be voting in favor of this. That's just my 2 cents. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other questions, comments?
So just for anyone who wasn't there in 2022, in order to prove a use variance, the applicant would have to prove that by granting the variance, they would lose all beneficial use of the property, as opposed to a dimensional variance, which is more than a mere inconvenience. So they would essentially have to prove that they could not use the property for any other means, any other activity in order to, but with that said, that's the zoning for ultimately up to the zoning board to decide. You guys are just speaking about the comprehensive plan.
Thank you, Mr. Marcella. Okay, at this time, then I'll accept a motion on this matter. Motion made by Commissioner Barberi to approve the positive recommendation. Do we have a second? Seconded by Commissioner Zadelis. All in favor, please say aye. Opposed, nay. Okay, may the record show that Commissioner Frias votes nay, and the other members present vote aye. Motion passes.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay. Next item, another zoning board of review recommendation. Brian Longo has filed an application for permission to convert an existing industrial building to residential use with 2 dwelling units at 45 Windsor Road.
As was previously stated, the subject parcel is located at 45 Windsor Road. Before I go into the rest of the specifics, I just want to clarify something. My staff memo stated use variance at the top. That was an error. This is a dimensional variance request. Again, the owner and applicant is Brian Longo. The location is 45 Windsor Road. so this is plat 2-2, lot 2406. The zone is B1 residential. And in this case, the applicant is seeking to construct a two-family, so we looked at it under those requirements, two-family, 8,000 square feet. The future land use map designation is single and two-family residential, less than 10.89 units per acre. Summary is that to allow for the conversion of a pre-existing non-conforming structure from a non-conforming use to a conforming use, being two-family residential on an undersized lot. The required minimum lot area for a two-family residential building in a B1 zone is 8,000 square feet, where the applicant is proposing 6,000 square feet. This is an aerial view of the subject parcel. This is a front facade from the street view. This is the existing conditions plan provided by the applicant, as well as a proposal which shows the existing conditions on the left and the proposed structure on the right. You notice that the structure actually extends currently nearly to the edge of the parcel, whereas the structure would end right here along here, and then there'd be a split yard in the rear. So again, the application is sought to allow for the conversion of a pre-existing non-conforming structure from a non-conforming use to a conforming use, two-family residential on an undersized lot. The required minimum lot area for a two-family residential in B1 is 8,000, where the applicant is proposing 6,000 square feet. The required density for this area as prescribed by the comp plan's future land use map is 10.89 units per acre, where the resulting density via the proposal is 14.52 units per acre. Parcels of higher density than what is prescribed in the future land use map are not uncommon in this neighborhood. 16% of the parcels in the surrounding area have a density ranging between 13 and 78 units per acre. Staff find that there are a number of goals and policies outlined in the comp plan which are relevant to the proposal as listed as such. It's staff's view that converting from a non-conforming commercial use to a conforming residential use brings the property into further compliance with the intentions set forth in the general purposes of the zoning ordinance, and is seen to be supported by more of those goals and policies in the comprehensive plan than not, as shown in the following findings. So staff did find that there were some inconsistencies between the proposal as submitted in the comp plan, namely being the required density for the areas prescribed by the future land use map is 10.89 units per acre, whereas the density offered via the proposal is 14.52. Land use policy 9.3, preserve the existing density of established neighborhoods. And land use policy 9.2, continue to give attention to neighborhood revitalization through code enforcement and financing mechanisms. Staff find the proposal to be consistent with the following policies as outlined in the comp plan. 9.1, protect and stabilize existing residential neighborhoods by increasing open space, improving roadway conditions, and making the zoning conform to existing uses. Land use policy 9.3, preserve the existing density of established neighborhoods. 2.2, enact flexible development standards that attain the desired community objectives, but also provide a wide range of building types, uses, subdivisions, and site plans. Housing policy 4.1, maintain a varied housing stock with units of different age, size, and type that are affordable to a wide range of incomes. Housing policy 5.1, reduce the burden of zoning and building regulations to enable 2 and 3 family dwelling units to be easily modified, maintained, and improved within existing neighborhoods. And housing policy 5.2, review zoning for existing residential neighborhoods to ensure the zoning matches as closely as possible the dimensions and unit types of what has already been built. Staff also finds the proposal is consistent with the general character of the surrounding neighborhood in the following ways. 2-family, 3-family, and multifamily dwellings are not uncommon in the neighborhood, the vast majority of which are on undersized lots and have densities far exceeding the future land use map designation. And this change of use brings the subject lot into further conformance with the zoning code and with the general residential character of the surrounding neighborhood. With that, in accordance with Rhode Island general law, staff finds the application consistent with the goals and purposes of the comprehensive plan and is compatible with the general character of the surrounding neighborhood. Staff therefore recommends that the City Plan Commission adopt the findings of fact documented above and forward a positive recommendation on the application to the Zoning Board of Review.
Thank you, Mr. Gerton. Is the applicant present?
Chairman, for the sake of the record, my name is Joseph Manera. I'm an attorney. I practice law on Reservoir Avenue in Cranston, Rhode Island. I've been in the exact same location for 42 years. 7 years on the London Avenue prior to that. Obviously, I agree with the recommendation of the Planning Commission, of the staff of the Planning Commission. This is a commercial property in a residential zone. And this, in essence, is a zoning case of reverse, where most zoning cases, you're trying to get variations from the code. Here, we're getting more in compliance with the code. We're getting a commercial use out of a residential area, a very nice residential area. My client has bought the property, and the property, I have to be very candid with the Planning Commission, was in deplorable condition. The last owner did not keep it up. There were rodents and all sorts of bad things there. This gentleman is going to turn it into a very nice, hopefully, two-family dwelling in an area that is full of two-family and three-family dwellings, all on undersized lots. I was going to make a presentation to the zoning board last night, but the case got continued. It was interesting that my client handed me this handbill dated 1901. It was called Little's Garage at 45 Windsor Road. And it was there for the last 29 years. Taking 1901 from 29 years was 1872. And if I remember my history correctly, Ulysses S. Grant was president of the United States in 1872. So it's been a non-conforming use. I think zoning came into Cranston in 1966, so it was a non-conforming use for like practically 100 years prior there too. So this gentleman is going to take that non-conforming commercial use out and put a new dwelling there. I know the neighbors were not very happy with the prior owner. This is not the prior owner. He is going to put some new construction there. He's going to clean it up, and he's going to be quite a bit in conformity with the area. I have him here. This is Brian Longo, the owner of the property. If he has, board wants to ask him any questions, and I know there's some neighbors probably behind me, and if they have any questions, that's why primarily we're here.
Thank you very much. Any questions from members of the commission to the applicant at this time? Commissioner Lanfear.
Thank you. What is the property? How is the property being used right now?
Vacant lot right now, so it's vacant.
The building is
The building-
vacant.
the building is vacant.
Commissioner Frias.
Yeah, I'd like to have that question for our staff, if you don't mind, just on your report. So I can ask them a question. I don't have to, you know, if you answer this. On page 6, you state that on the 5th bullet, it says parcels of higher density than the FLUM are not uncommon. You say 16% of the parcels in the surrounding area have a density between 13 and 78. Is 16% the correct number, or is it the number that you list on page 7, where you say the vast majority, 87%, are on undersized lots and have densities exceeding the FLUM?
Both numbers are correct.
Okay.
What they're referring to, different percentages of different types. So the 16% refers to all of the parcels, whereas the 87 is of the 2 and 3 family in the area. You follow what I mean by that? So 16% of the total parcels in a 400-foot radius have a density ranging between 13 and 78 units per acre, whereas of the 2, 3, and multifamily dwellings, 87 of which are on undersized lots, meaning the remaining 13% are on normal size lots.
Just a quick question to the applicant then. I'm not as familiar as your neighborhood as I should be. I sometimes walk a neighborhood before I vote on something in the neighborhood. Could you describe the neighborhood where this is? Is it primarily single family homes, or is it like multifamily homes, or a mixture?
I'm a little familiar with the area, and it's a mixture of some single family homes, two family homes, three family homes. I'm just gonna compare this with the zoning board. I had my client take photographs of the property, and there was like 4 or 5 homes adjacent to the property that are on small lots, and that there's 3 family uses. 3 family uses on a 5,000 square foot lot. This is a beautiful area, but an older area. This is a time when most of these properties predate zoning, predate, code requirements, and people bought on small lots. It's just the way it is. I found 4 pieces of property quickly on Windsor Road, and I didn't even do the whole street. There were 2 family, 3 family, and undersized lots. Some of the 3 families have been condoed. Some are 2 families. This is just gonna be conformity with the area.
That's my question. I just didn't want to see like I'm agreeing to a multifamily in an area that's basically exclusively or almost exclusively single family. And you're representing to me that even on the street, there's 2 family, 3 families and stuff like that. Okay.
This is 45 Windsor. 39 Windsor is 3 units on 5,000 square feet. 40 Windsor is 3 units on 5,479 square feet. 53 Windsor is 2 units on 4,350 square feet. 31 Windsor Road is 3 units on 4,800 square feet. These are all properties on the street.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions from the commission at this time? Thank you very much. Any members of the public like to be heard? If so, please step up to the microphone and state your name and address for the record.
Patricia Dumas, 53 Windsor. I'm adjacent to the property. I'm all for beautifying it because it has been horrific. My concerns are mostly for the health of the adjoining properties as the demolition takes place. I know it did house automobiles, so what is in the soil? Have there been any measures to do soil testing? Is there a tank underground? If this was an auto repair or auto service station, historically speaking, I'm sure the environment wasn't protected then. So as they're demolishing the back of it and doing all sorts of work, what's the air quality for the neighbors? No.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, I'm Chris Van Scapen. We live at 43 Windsor, so we are also adjacent to the property. In fact, you can see our house in one of the pictures. This property abuts our driveway. I mean, we are probably 12 to 15 feet from this building. It's a brick building. I share the concerns about the environmental impact. I share the concerns about how they're going to do renovations on this building safely with us being as close as we are. I mean, they did a roofing job, I don't know how many years. We've been there 20 years and this building has been vacant the entire time, other than the raccoons who have inhabited it. But they did a roofing job. We end up with flat tires from nails and everything. It's just to acknowledge that the access to the property is extremely limited. I mean, it's either in through the front door or it's our driveway or the other neighbor's driveway. There's very little access. And just the other thing I just want to note is there certainly are examples of other multifamily houses on our street. That's absolutely true. None of them look like this building. This is a historic neighborhood. You know, these are old, beautiful houses. And so my concern is just, you know, this really needs to be renovated to look like it fits into the neighborhood. And I still have, my husband and I have the concern too that, you know, this building has been terrible, but at least it's been vacant. Honestly, it's been a blessing that nobody's been in there because we are so close to it. There's been no noise, no activity, no people. And I can't imagine what that's going to look like, you know, with somebody's window 12 feet away from my window. So we also just want to be able to talk about, can we do privacy glass? Can we, you know, somehow have a conversation about what it means to have a neighbor this close? Because that also does not exist on this street or in Edgewood. So I'm all for making this better, but I think there are some real considerations that you need, you know, to carefully think through. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Nancy Stone, and my property abuts the back of 45 Windsor. I'm also very concerned about the environmental impact of it having been a service station for automobiles for so many years. And in terms of the soil and what will happen with, if there's a high lead content that becomes airborne, that can impact, you know, lead not only impacts children, but it also impacts adults. And that's my main concern. I think it's great that it's going to be renovated, but I also agree with the previous woman, Chris, who spoke about it fitting in with the neighborhood, because there are multifamily homes, but they are beautiful kind of Victorian homes that have, maybe they're a triple decker or a double decker. So they don't look like they're multifamily homes, if you know what I mean. They're very beautiful. So those are my two concerns, but primarily the environmental and the health concerns for the people around that area. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Anyone else present who would like to address this issue? Okay, seeing none. Mr. Lima, do we have anyone online?
There is no public comment.
Okay, in that case, I will accept a motion that public comment be closed. Motion made by Commissioner Zedella, seconded by Commissioner Matus. All in favor, please say aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Further questions from members of the commission? Commissioner Frias.
This is just more of a comment before we get into voting. We'll hear if my fellow commissioners have to say about this, but I wanted to address some of the public comment. We just make a recommendation to the zoning board. Your concerns about the environment, privacy, appearances, those are issues that are better addressed to the zoning board, because whatever they approve, they can put certain conditions within reason of the law, okay? We kind of look at whether or not it's consistent with the comp plan. That's what we do here. I went back and forth about this, and I thought that because it's going from a commercial use to a residential use in a B1 neighborhood, that is more consistent with the future land use map and the comp plan. I was very concerned about the density. As people know, that's what my issue is many times. But I've heard enough evidence from the applicant that it was confirmed by others that there is multifamily homes on this street, and therefore it would fit in the neighborhood. Whether its appearance fits in the neighborhood, that's not really an issue really in the comp plan, I think. I'm not sure it does. So balancing it, I am inclined to vote for a positive recommendation. I hope the zoning board hears your concerns and it can be addressed. But I'll listen to my fellow colleagues. Maybe they have a different viewpoint, but that's where it's kind of coming down for me on this.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other comments from members of the commission? Commissioner Lanfear.
I had a hard time with this one. I live in Edgewood. I walk your street probably many days of the week. And I'm familiar with the mess that's been sitting there. So I was very surprised when I read that the density was already above what is in our future land use map. So I took out the map that the applicant provided to the zoning board, and I went through and kind of colored in all of those parcels within that 400-foot radius, because I think that's the neighborhood when you refer to the neighborhood in the reports that you prepare. And there are a total of 82 parcels as I counted them. I could be corrected. I may have missed one or two. 66 of those are single family parcels. 12 are 2 or 3 family. 2 are mixed use located on Broad Street. I think both a lawyer's office and another professional office. And there's 1 commercial use on Broad Street, which escapes me at the moment as to what that is. But 1 commercial use. So it is basically 80.49% single family and approximately 12.6% 2 or 3 family. And I lumped the mixed use and the commercial use, and one other place, which is within the 400-foot radius, is just a little corner of an apartment complex on Broad Street, which I believe probably made the density higher in the area. I saw in the report that it said density in the neighborhood ranged from, I believe it was 13% to 78.
That parcel you're referring to is
13 to 78.
the 78.
And so the 78 piqued my curiosity. It's a really big number. And I assumed that that was the apartment complex.
It is.
It's on Broad Street. I wouldn't say it's in the middle of that neighborhood down the street. So I, in some respects, discounted that. But the 2 and 3 family homes do abut this property on either side across the street. And they're all, I would say, within 200 feet of the subject property. But the neighborhood around that is almost exclusively single family. So while it might not be uncommon to find 2 and 3 family, I don't think it's that common if you're looking at the full 400-foot radius. And so the density bothers me. I think that we need to be very careful throughout the city, but we should not have a comp plan with a future land use map that tells us density should be restricted to this amount, and then we find reasons to exceed that because it might be higher within that area. We say, why not? It's higher anyway. I don't think we should do that. I think we should strive to stick with what our comp plan tells us is appropriate. So I will leave my fellow commissioners on that, but I would say that for me, the density outweighs some of the other considerations that were reasons in the comp plan to approve this. I would also say housing goal 5.1 says that we should support and enable 2 and 3 family unit dwellings to be easily modified, maintained, and improved. This isn't a dwelling. So I don't think we're violating that. It can become a dwelling. It could become a 1-family dwelling as well. And I would also say that in terms of protecting and stabilizing existing residential neighborhoods, yeah, I can't argue with the fact that it would be good to improve that property. However, I don't think it increases open space, improves roadway conditions, and makes the zoning conform to existing uses, because right now it's not being used. So as I look at that, I will not vote for it because of the density issue. And I think that it says parcels in the surrounding areas have a density ranging between 13 and 78. And I think that in some respects, we need to sort of discount that 78. It certainly makes it sound like this wouldn't be a big deal compared to 78, but that's on Broad Street. It's an apartment complex, and I don't think it should enter into our calculations for this particular project. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner Lanfear. Commissioner Barberry.
I also live in the neighborhood right around the corner, and I frequently bump into our fellow commissioner walking the dogs. And I will say that this piece of property is definitely an eyesore in the neighborhood and bringing down kind of what the unique character of our neighborhood. I also would say that it's posing sort of like a safety concern as it stands right now and being existing there. And when we talk about, you know, the type of style of the homes, and I get the style of the homes built in the early 1900s, 1700s, 1800s in our neighborhood, had very unique character. This piece of property is just the brick of it. I don't even know why it's even standing amongst some of the nice character homes that we have. I will say that what I've seen here kind of outweighs some of the things that we got in the density concerns that you brought up and the type of style of the house. I'm in favor of seeing this being put on this piece of property and being put up, because I'm looking right on Narragansett Boulevard, and they got those condos that are right there that are also different style than most of the neighborhood calls for. So as people go through our neighborhood and they're renovating houses over there, they are updating them to look a little different than some of the characteristics the neighborhood looks like. So I will be in favor of it just because of the kind of upgrades that are happening in many houses in our neighborhood right now. And even what it already exists right on Narragansett Boulevard itself and the condos that were put there, I think this would still fit in. And it's a lot better than what is there right now.
Thank you, Commissioner Barberry. Commissioner Frias.
Real quick thing. I just want to ask a quick question, Mr. Gerton, and then I'll have a quick comment. Is Mr. Gerton, Ms. Commissioner Lanfear pointed out some statistics about the number of parcels there and how many of them are single family homes. From your review of the data, does her numbers sound correct?
I would say they more or less sounded correct. However, I didn't do this by hand. I used geospatial tools that gave me very specific numbers based on the exact outline in the part.
Okay.
Yeah, and I also didn't exclude things from the required buffered zone.
No, it's
my calculation.
I have never voted for a higher density on a parcel if the majority of the neighborhood conforms with the density. And I'm not going to start now. So I've switched my mind. Thank you, Commissioner Lanfear. I should have done my homework before the meeting on that thing. I was doing the marijuana and the comp plan.
We've closed public comment. I'm so sorry. Okay, any other questions, comments? Okay, I'll accept a motion. Motion made by Commissioner Barberry to accept the staff recommendation to the zoning board, seconded by Commissioner Zadelis. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Okay, we have five, yeah, we have five, the motion passes. We have five ayes and 2 nays. Director Pizzullo, any announcements?
No announcements. At this point, are we in consensus that we want to do the meeting with the consultant on November 15th?
The 15th, you said?
November 15th.
November 15th.
I was gonna say, we did agree to do a meeting by the end of November. If, I prefer not November 15th at this point, but if that's the date, that's the date. I'm just looking at people's calendars.
Fine with me, and I know we're going to need all the time that we can get. Other comments?
Mr. Chairman,
yes.
if I just may, and I don't know what Ms. Sweet's availability is, but it's going to have to be coordinated with Ms. Sweet, so I don't know if we can say the 15th.
Maybe what the planning director could do is, schedule a meeting. Well, the city solicitor is here, whether the consultant can, the planning director and consultant can get together and just set up some dates and then tell us what are available, and then we just get a meeting at the end of November. Is that possible, or do we have to do it at this meeting?
The third, if we were going to have a meeting with Ashley this month, the third Wednesday was pretty much the only window she had. And I don't even know if that she has that window. But I do recall we spoke to her in September, and we didn't speak to her about this when we spoke early this week. But that's probably the only candidate. Once we start hitting the holiday times, and her availability is next to nothing at that point. So I will coordinate with her and send out a message, but more than likely is the 15th.
Okay, and if you find that we're not able to generate a quorum, then that's it. We can't meet. Okay, thank you, everyone. I'll accept a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion made by Commissioner Zadelis, seconded by Commissioner Matus. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Ayes have it. Thank you all.